Alrighty, 10 o'clock. How are we all doing today? How's the lag on GV student? I guess can we all hear me okay? Pretty good. That's good. Hmm. Nope, can't hear me. Awesome. Alrighty. So, plan for today is we're going to wrap up some of the process models, and it's going to be a little more high level today. We're going to talk about Agile a little bit. And if time allows, we are going to do a little more GitHub work because I want to show you what your basically what your lab process is going to be here. Before I forget, so Friday, I'll put out an announcement. I didn't want to mention it until today, but Friday we're not going to actually have a class meeting, so there won't be a live stream on Friday. I have a conference to be at, I guess virtually, but it happens to fall during class time. So I've got some group work for you all to do on Friday. And let me zoom in a bit here. Sorry for the horrible formatting. Blackboard doesn't tend to like enter or spacing, apparently. Guess maybe next time I'll just write the raw HTML and see how that looks. Basically, what I'm going to be looking for on Friday is it would be an in-class lab, but we'll consider it out of class. So normally, in class, I would give you all time to work on your term projects, give you all time to work on your group things. So we're going to condense it all into 1 hour on Friday, basically, where it'll be self-guided and I guess, you don't necessarily have to do it during the class time, but it's a nice time where everybody can meet, I suppose. And to make this less burdensome for you, you can consider this to be your meeting for the week if you would like. And I'll edit this later. I don't know why, like I lost spaces here all of a sudden. Anyway, I'm looking for three things. And this is the seed for your homework that's due at the end of the month. So I'm trying to be a little bit cheeky here in that this forced work is basically taking some of the effort off that you all have to do later. So hopefully this is helpful for you. So first thing, looking for the elevator pitch for your project. This is a word that you're probably going to come to depending on how your process goes here at Grand Valley. You're either going to hate it and people are going to tell you to figure it out all the time, or you're never going to hear about it again. Basically, this is just what is the short, high level, what is your project? So 2 sentences or less. So consider it the time it takes to ride an elevator and pitch it to an angel investor or something of that nature. So high level, what do you plan to do for this project? And consider this to be a chunk of your introduction that I'm looking for in your proposal. So what is that? And again, I know some of you already have an idea. I'm seeing chatter in the Discord channels that, for the people that are here already or in my Discord, not in their own place. Ideas are kind of changing here. I'm looking for you to try to crystallize it a little bit. So what are you doing for your project? Very high level. Second thing I'm looking for, we have not talked about use cases. We have not talked about requirements or user stories or any kind of a artifact which is going to capture your project. So what are the features? What do they do? What are the modules? Things of that nature. We will be getting into that. We're starting at a high level and we're going a little bit more granular as we go. So I will ask you for requirements. I will ask you for use cases, things of that nature. But what I'm looking for right now is what are 2 features that you plan to implement for your project based on your elevator pitch. And what I'm looking for is what is the name of it and what is a brief high-level description. Again, paragraph or less or something like that. This can be just prose, natural language. What is it? So if you're doing a phone application or a web app, you're probably going to need a registration page, right? So that you can identify users. If you're doing a game, you're going to need a way to handle user input or update enemy state. If you're doing a Java application, you need a form element to make a GUI for the user, right? So that'd be one feature. The idea for this is to get you thinking about all the pieces that you have to program throughout the semester, that you have to make, or that you have to implement in some way, right? So what are two features? Obviously, you're going to have more for a whole semester term project. Okay, so elevator pitch, two features. And then for the third thing, I want your teams to reflect on your process. So for us, going through this whole semester, we're going through all the different aspects of the software engineering process to varying degrees. This is basically a waterfall plus prototyping type of thing that we're doing in class. So we're going to start with use cases and requirements. We're going to go through your standard software engineering artifacts and talk about them, and you'll be creating them for homework as we go. Since we only have one semester, you're basically getting one shot at each of them. Unless if I tell you, you have to go back and fix something, but we're not going to say, get to midterm, and then I'm going to make you go all the way back to requirements and start over, right? It's going to be an iterative process, and you're going to be making little prototypes, little demos along the way to show me where you're at. So this is more of just a discussion for your team. I want you all to think about what kind of a process are you going to use internally, right? So you all have project teams. Whatever is going to work best for you to assign work and divvy up work is going to be important, right? So we're doing waterfall and prototype for class. Are you going to do something agile, right? Are you going to do something Scrum-ish where you pick tasks weekly and you try to work on those? Are you going to do, your own variant of waterfall? I'm not looking for necessarily there's not a correct answer here, but you have to have thought about it. So it's a little bit more open-ended of a question, I guess, but I'm just kind of curious because I know that all your teams have met and talked in some way. What is the best way for you all to work together? And this hopefully will help you as well to figure out how things are going to work on your teams. All right, so basically I'm looking for three things here. Points 1 and 2 go right into your homework assignment or right into a later assignment. So this is not just throwaway effort. So don't lose this. Third one is more open-ended for you for hopefully making your teams gel a little bit better. And because this is group work, because this is term project related, I would like you to check it into your team's weekly meeting minutes. So you have until Sunday at midnight, basically, for this. And don't forget that I need to add a calendar entry. Actually, if you don't see one in there, please somebody let me know at some point. But your weekly meeting minutes have to start. They should be in there by Sunday at midnight, so I'll keep track every week. But this just goes right in there. So this is basically your team meeting for the week. So hopefully 3 or 4 birds with one stone, whether you want it to meet on Friday or not, I guess. Anybody have any questions on what I'm looking for here? Again, I will not be on Twitch. I will be in something else. It's actually Google related, but I will be on Discord and I'll be available on email if you have any questions as you go. You can do this today, you can do it tomorrow, you can do it Friday, but basically this would be the time we spend on Friday. Everybody good? Hopefully. Good, good, good. Okay, yes, sir. Do you have a template for meeting minutes? Yes, I do. So it is in the term projects repository. So last time I mentioned that I updated the base. If your team hasn't forked this yet, I would look into it actually. I'm just realizing my timing isn't going to work strictly because this is due at the end of the month, yet I'm asking you to keep track of your meeting minutes. Guess let me let me think about this. Oh yeah, okay. Let's put a pin in checking into the meeting minutes for now. I'll send out a follow-up later on. Maybe what I'll do is I'll make it a Blackboard assignment for this week or something. But yeah, so if you go into meeting minutes, or sorry, meetings, there is a template right here. So what's your team name, who's present, date and time of the meeting, and what did you talk about? So basically your discussion points would be this group assignment. How did I not consider that? Sorry about that. That's my bad, not your bad. If you had no idea what meeting minutes were, that's on me. Because it's not due till the 29th. Okay, I'll send something out after class. Let me write that down really quickly because otherwise I will forget. All right, see, right here. We got it. Okie dokie. So we ended last time talking about the various process models. And let me present this. Otherwise, it's going to look funky. We talked about waterfall, we talked about spiral, agile, kind of at a high level, but hopefully you got a feel for what they all are. And again, pick the model that's going to work for you. We're going to talk a little bit more about agile today because I feel like we didn't really get into that enough. So we'll talk about that a bit more as well. We ended on extreme programming and this idea that a model is basically going to be, sorry, a process model is going to be required for any good team, any good software development process, right? So the whole notion is that we're going to take one of these processes and apply it to a project. That way, again, we get traceability back to decisions that were made at the very outset of the process. We have a whole bunch of different, ideally, benefits out of this kind of a system here. And this is like the middle of the slide. So, part two. Let's blow this up a level of abstraction, basically. Let's get my pointer. So everybody loves the red pointer, he said sarcastically. So all of these models that we looked at, excuse me, all of these models we've looked at can be categorized into a handful of different types. Right, so we have a linear flow, we have an iterative flow, evolutionary. So we're going to evolve our processes, our artifacts as we go. And then we have parallel, where we just kind of dive off the deep end into letting everybody do their own thing. So let's look at linear first and foremost. This is a very obviously linear, straightforward process. We have no arrows going back. We have no feedback loops in here. This is strictly a manufacturing process type of flow, and we've applied it to software engineering, right? So does anybody remember what this kind of a model would be if we were to take it and apply it to a process we've talked about last time? If you don't remember, I'll give you a hint. It's very brittle. Again, no feedback. Waterfall, waterfall, waterfall. Perfect. Yes. So take these boxes and kind of align them in a downward slope, and then you have your waterfall model. Perfect. Yes, very, very straightforward. But the important things, again, is these boxes. So what is inside each of them will typically apply to any of the models that we're going to be using. So for instance, we have a communication box here. What kind of activities do you think we would be doing in communication for something like waterfall? Right, because these are high-level words that could mean anything. Sending emails, developing requirements, just reading the chat here. Finding out user needs. Yeah, so these are all actually quite good. Depending on your implementation of this model, sorry, let me zip out here really quickly because I want to go back to our waterfall model. So it follows a pretty similar process to this, right? So communication could be the requirements analysis level. It could be talking with your customer or your client. So that'd be your user needs, right? developing a basic idea of what the system is and then crystallizing it, right? So once we get through this communications phase, customer input is done until we get to delivery, right? And that can be a problem depending on our particular situation. So yeah, communication definitely is exactly what it says. Sending emails, being on the phone, holding meetings, um, holding Q&A sessions with customers to figure out what their requirements are. Later on, we'll probably get into how to actually talk to customers because there are multiple ways you can do it. There are surveys, there are panel meetings, there are observation techniques. So basically, it's not just let's get in a room and talk. You're going to follow a script effectively for how to figure out what they want. But again, set in stone at this point. Then we get into our planning phase. We get to our artifact development. We get into our architecture. Then we take the output, take it into modeling. So take your system design, your architectures, whatever you're going to be developing to look at your system as a whole or at a high level. Then we're going to create our UML models. And depending on your company, this is often where, and this isn't like strictly related to waterfall, this could be any of the processes. You get a lot of pushback in the real world about creating UML models. So you're going to come to know and love it in this class, but you may find that you never actually make a class diagram in your life after this, which is sad, because there's actually a lot of benefits creating and maintaining the models. And what do? You take your models, you build your system. Implementation, coding, however you're going to be creating the prototype and the software releases. You're going to use ideally the models, but there's a good chance that you go straight from communication to construction, depending on how the real world ends up working for you. Then we go to deployment. We send it out to the world. You have a big project meeting with your customer. Here's your software. Here's it working in your system, whatever it is. Are you happy with it? Hopefully, because we don't have a way to go back. So yeah, waterfall, definitely. Then we get into the more iterative versions. So again, we see the exact same boxes here. The only difference is that we have different arrows. And what is hidden, and I should mention this for all of these models, this is effectively a data flow diagram, which I don't know if I'll get into or not in this class, but what is very helpful is to see what the inputs and outputs are. How are your data changing? And I'm using data as a plural, so how are your data? But what's coming in through communication, this is going to be perhaps system proposal, maybe initial user needs, and then out, hopefully, is a requirements document, right? So how are things changing in this process is going to be very, very important here. So again, same process, communication, planning, modeling, construction, deployment. Difference here, we have ways to go back. Right, so this is the iterative process flow. Think of it as a evolution of waterfall. Now we get into something more like prototyping. We get into something like the V model, where we have still a rigorous process. Ideally, requirements are not going to change, but if something happens, we can go back, right? We can go back to the left side of the V for our, we do verification instead of validation later on, or we iterate our prototype. And so how are things changing? Here we have ways to go back. And you sitting there, at home or in the library or classroom or wherever you're at, you're looking at this and you're just seeing arrows. And you're probably thinking, why does he keep harping on these stupid little arrows? There is just so much going on here with the transition from one phase to another that is just not shown in a figure like this. All right, let me give you a real world example. Let's say that I want to go from modeling to construction. So I'm going to follow this arrow here. Just going down this path, saying that we have our models correct or that we have our requirements correct, involves multiple meetings between clients, between internal teams, between quality, checking off many, many boxes to make sure that everything is green, right? We have passed our particular milestone. Everything's validated, everything has been triple, quadruple checked. We've prototyped something perhaps, or we've whiteboarded everything, and we pass various milestones. Okay. That's what's happening on these arrows, right? Just think of weeks and months of effort just to transition from one phase to another. And again, these are all things that are tracked too, which you feed back into a later auditing process. The very bland, dark side of software engineering is the making sure that all the boxes are checked correctly, basically. Okay, so we have iterative, we had linear, which again is basically waterfall. Now let's go to an evolutionary state. So evolution means that things are going to change over time, right? Ideally for the better, not always the case. If you know much about evolution, it is a process which basically deals with change, right? And what we have here, we have a loop. So we go into our communication. Again, this is our starting point. If you're looking at this in terms of like a state flow diagram or a state machine or something of that nature, this would be your filled in start bubble. We start our project. We have a client customer agreement. We have some way to kick the project off. We get their needs, might be requirements, might be user stories, depending on what kind of a process you're following here. And then we're going to go around and around and around this loop. Every cycle of this process will have an increment. It will have a project release, right? We're going to go through all of these stages, each loop. Anybody remember what this one would be? I've got a couple Q&A slides later on just to make sure everybody's paying attention. But what kind of a process would this be? This is like spiral. Yeah, I mean, it looks like a spiral, right? It's a circle. So spiral definitely fits in here. We also have the phase development or the incremental, depending on what you want to call it. But yeah, this is an iterative flow, right? The key difference here, and this is why kind of understanding these high-level models are important, is that if you understand how they all fit together, you can modify them for your company's needs. Right? If you go into like a system assurance type of person or a quality engineer, this type of a model is where you're going to leave your mark on the company. How are you going to make your teams work together? So here, everything is encapsulated in one loop. Here, everything is a single loop. Now again, right, we have ways to go back, we have ways to update things, but we're not doing multiple deployments. Here, you have multiple software releases. Here, if you have a software release, it's going to be internal, but the output at the end is just one, package you give to your customer. Here's version 1.1. Here's our alpha. Here's our beta. Here's our gamma. If you don't like getting to, if you have to go through all of the different letters of the alphabet. All right, so we have evolutionary now, so very circular. Last but not least, we get into parallel. So here, again, we have our little loopy-doopy here. Communication, planning, modeling, requirements, architecture, use cases, UML models, things of that nature. They're all developed in a loop. Then we go down to construction and deployment. And didn't have any legends in the prior figures, but time is basically flowing in the direction of the arrows. So here you have something more like Agile, right? Because that's the only choice left. You're going to spend a lot of time developing your user stories, developing, figuring out your story cards, whatever Agile paradigm you're using. You're going to spend a lot of time figuring that out. And then you might go into construction and deployment in parallel. All right, so this kind of more merits like a dotted line, but we might be building as we're doing this part. So it's a little bit more flexible. Well, I guess a lot of bit more flexible. Point is that we have all of these different types of software processes, and this is not the end-all be-all. I'm sure there are more coming, right? What's the next great industry 4.5 6.0 conference that's going to happen next? If you ever look at billboards, here's the Industry 4.0 conference. This is where the next new exciting thing happens. I'm sure there's more to come. So high level, those are your models. Those are what you have to deal with. And looking at the slides, I was realizing that you probably didn't get enough detail on some of the Agile things. So now you all get a preview of what life is like in one of the graduate classes, because this is some of the content from a upper level class. I just picked a random graduation college picture, so the fact that it's in Cyrillic has nothing to do with the class, just they're throwing their hats in the air. So let's talk about Agile a little bit. So here we have post-it notes. Has anybody dealt with Agile or Scrum or anything like that? I can't remember if anybody in this class did or not. This either gives you a horrible feeling of dread in your stomach or perhaps exciting or interesting. Yes. Okay. Got to have our Apple keyboard here too if we're going to do Agile. Okay, so Agile, we talked about the manifesto. We talked about at a high level. It's parallel. It's very interactive, right? Effectively, what you have are those 4 boxes for planning, analysis, design, implementation. And they're all going to happen either in parallel or at once or something like that. And you just have a very simple loop, right? We're going to keep building our prototype as we go. The notion is that you have something called an Agile triangle, which to me probably applies to any project, not just Agile. But what are the trade-offs between value, between quality, and between your constraints? All right, so if you're trying to figure out, pretend this is a graph, effectively, how much effort do you put into quality versus satisfying your constraints versus releasing a good product? You're going to fall somewhere on this triangle where you're not going to be the best at everything. That's just the way the real world works. Again, you could consider this viable for any project, not just Agile. But it's a nice colorful gradient, so let's call it Agile. All right, so I'm going to just pop all these up on the screen here. Again, basically, Agile is focused on teams. It is focused on customer. It is focused on creating solutions and continuously basically evolving, developing your product. Here we care more about face-to-face. We care about phone calls. We care about talking to people more than developing a hard crystallized set of requirements. I keep saying crystallized because if you're crystallizing your requirement, they're never going to change, right? They're set in stone. They're crystallized. um, so again, the idea here is that you work together. You get into the deep end of the IS spectrum of Agile, and you start talking about how do you create a team that works well together, and you care about that more than developing hard requirements, because a team that works well together can build a better product, right? So we care about software that works. We care about software that is well organized, that we don't burn out our team, that our teams self-organize. So basically the point here is that why Agile is so interesting, at least academically from an outsider's perspective in a way, you focus on the people rather than the product, which is kind of an interesting way to look at things, especially if you don't know what you're building, I suppose. So we have this idea. And my question to you is it that simple? So we focus on people, right? We give them maybe ways to gel as a team. We give them the chance to build prototypes, continuously refine features, but they're happy while they're working. Is it that simple? Is basically my question to you all. Let me do this for my benefit. So do you just start writing code with Agile? No, I moved it. About my mouse. I feel like there will still be pressure and demand from customers. Ah, yes, the real world comes back to bite us once again. Um, that is definitely a problem. So high level, the answer is no. It's not just that simple. I get it in big red, garbledy font. team may be happy to work at their own pace, but the customers may not like that. Again, the real world butts its ugly head. So I will say this. Everything I've been talking about Agile has been, these are the high-level bullet points of what Agile is. Now, if you take this manifesto, this idea of how to create a team that's happy, there is so much more that goes into it to make it a real world process. Okay, so talking with customers all the time can be maddening and mind numbing because if you're on the phone with the customer every day, I think somebody mentioned it last time that they're going to want something else and want something else and want something else, right? Or they're not happy, they want you to refine this, but they don't know how to say that. So there is a lot that can go into Agile. So this is just one idea for Agile. So this is more of a lean type of thing, which lean versus Agile, again, two different buzzwords, two different ways to do kind of a similar process. But the, I hate calling them buzzwords, but Agile has its own words for everything. Whereas before we were happy to call them requirements or design documents, now they have to be epics, they have to be user stories, they have to be, I don't know, pet peeve of mine, I hate when people invent words just to sound businessy. Um, so take that what you will. That's my cynicism bubbling through. It is what it is. If you go into Agile, you're gonna have to use these terms. I also hate the term synergy. But yeah, anyway, you have things like epics, where these are basically your high-level view of what a feature is in your project, right? Then you have owners, you have managers, you have architects. You might have something called a Kanban where you have boards of sticky notes with all of your features that have to be worked on. Who's responsible for what? What's the timeline? Right? Do I need a week to work on this or 2 days to just build this one thing? Communication's a big thing, so you're going to have coordination. You're going to have all kinds of people working through these particular aspects of your process, right? So it's not just the developers. You're going to have system architects, you have product managers, you have the owners of your company maybe getting feedback. You might have to go into a continuous integration or full stack type of role where you put a feature into your pipeline that gets automatically tested. You get feedback at the end of the day if your test case failed, or you go through a continuous deployment phase where you get an automated software release. Anybody that's worked with like a Travis or a Jenkins or anything like that on an open source project knows what continuous delivery is. All this basically means is you have an automated process for creating a software release. All right, you may also have scrums. So Scrum is something where you got to make sure you have somebody figure out what the snack is for the day. But here's our backlog. Here's our development tasks. Here's what is in testing, right? Here's what's ready for production. Here are complete tasks. These post-it notes here are all going to be user stories, which are high-level requirements, but there's also more information on them too. Who is perhaps responsible for what? You may have a Scrum Master, exactly. So somebody has to be in charge of coordinating all of this too, right? This is not self-organizing if you don't have somebody kind of guiding what you're doing. I don't know if any of you have ever watched the old Dilbert cartoon that they had out for, I think, one season before the creator kind of went off the rails on his interesting political stances. But they had a episode where the engineers ran the company, and then the building exploded at the end of the day. So Scrum part of construction slash coding. Scrum is basically, it is a version of Agile. So it encompasses the whole thing. Um, it's usually focused on releasing and development, but it also has figuring out what the different use cases are, what the user stories are, planning out how it's going to work. So those of you that have had a class where you've done a sprint, it's basically a Scrum-esque type of thing. So you're going to have teams, you'll have daily scrums where you all meet up at 9 a.m. or whatever. Everybody talks for a minute or two, and then you go on about your business. So that would be like a sprint where I have things to work on. The team has to get through all of these things. You update your release. You perhaps do a retrospective for your next sprint, and so on and so forth. Just kind of dipping back a little bit, where I keep mentioning we have different forms of Agile. Here is one particular view of things. And again, this is a little bit less focused on, these nice graphics about how everything fits together and more how an actual project would work. So you have an envision phase where you come up with project scope, you come up with boundaries, feasibility studies, figuring out what your team might be, coming up with a basic architecture. So again, consider this almost like your communication planning. It's very similar. You have speculation. You try to figure out what your user stories are. We'll talk about user stories again later on, but these are basically, again, high-level features. Then you go through exploration. And this is inventing words for the purpose of inventing words. And I'm sure there are lots of people out there who spend a lot of time on that. All you're doing is figuring out how to do an iteration of your project, right? Do some development, maybe refine your user stories, refine your features, go through testing, perhaps go through focus groups or technical reviews. We're going to have multiple iterations of each of these, too. These are all effectively cycles inside. And then once you're happy, once your clients are happy and your customers, then you go into launch, you go into your final documentation where you clean everything up, create your whole package, and then push it out and maintain it. And the interesting thing with this view, where you don't really get it in this kind of a high-level feature or a high-level view, is that in your envision phase, you have a cycle. Let's figure out what our product's going to be. Let's scope it out, and then let's create a plan. And this is going to be cyclical. You're going to go through many, many development phases of the vision maybe changing a little bit, either for the positive or negative. You have your explore cycle. Again, this is this explore phase where we have an iteration plan, where if you go to Scrum, we have an iteration. Sorry, I should follow the arrows. You have an iteration. You're going to do your development tasks. You'll do your reviews internally and externally, make changes to your plan, and keep going. At all of these phases, there will be user interaction, there will be client interaction. So there's a lot more ownership. And the important thing to consider, honestly, I really like this figure here. This is, again, not the end-all be-all. Every project will have different needs and different requirements, and that's where you have to be flexible. But let's say that you have unclear user requirements, right? So I'm developing an app. My grandma said, here's what the best app in the world's going to be. Go make it. Okay, well, what's it going to be about? I don't know. You're the coder, right? So that's an unclear requirement. You go to something a little bit more entrenched, something automotive, something like a space shuttle, or something where everybody knows everything in advance. Something like waterfall, pretty good. Unclear requirements, waterfall is pretty bad. But you get into the agile, they're excellent because they can adapt. You don't know what the technologies are. Again, waterfall, parallel, not that great. But you start getting into the more flexible areas, you bring in team members who know these technologies or who can take the time to learn them. Kind of the interesting thing with this figure, and again, these are categorizing how the various techniques work, you actually see, which I find really interesting, that the agile methodologies, whether for good or bad, they tend to be pretty decent at most problems you may encounter. So if you have a short time schedule, you can spin up a team really quickly with Agile. If you have a very short time schedule, you can't fit that in with a waterfall. So again, the idea here is that if you have a project and you have the ownership where you can pick one of these methodologies, analyze everything, not just how hard it is to code, but what kind of people you have, what kind of time you have, what kind of budget you have. And this is honestly why I asked you all to look into and think about what your problems are going to be that you have to face, right? Because if you have a team where I'm asking you all to make a term project. I'm not necessarily asking you to code it. I just want to have a implemented package. So I know there's one team that's doing RPG Maker, which has a limited scripting language. That's not strictly a compiled language, but you can do test cases and stuff like that. I'm going to pick on that team just for fun. Not everybody knows RPG Maker, so you have unfamiliar technology. And what does that mean for the team? Well, at least one person knows how it works. They can help out the other team members to get up and running quickly, or give them resources or tutorials. Let's pick on RPG Maker a little bit more. Or if you don't want to identify a team, let's maybe use somebody that's using Pico 8 or Godot or Unity. If nobody knows that technology, there has to be a ramp-up time where they get used to it, right? And that's time that could be spent elsewhere. So with Waterfall, you can't do that. With Scrum, you can have the time internally to get up and running quickly. Alrighty, so we have 10 minutes left. Any questions so far? I'm just going to skip this slide because this is basically just showing you where all your time would be spent for the different aspects of a general software engineering process. So modeling is going to spend more time at the early stages, requirements in the middle, design implementation later on, testing and deployment at the very end. This is not one particular process. This would be all of them. But everybody good so far? Would maintenance come in after each of these processes? It depends. So maintenance is basically, it generally comes after a software release. Yeah, so basically everything is evolutionary in the end. So the thing with maintenance is that not everybody does it. So if I am done with a product, I release it to the customer, we're done, there's no maintenance there. Ideally, for your benefit, honestly, because that goes into the quality aspect of that triangle and your client's happiness, there should be a maintenance regardless, right? So if some kind of a problem crops up, there should be a way to handle that. Just depends. So yeah, if you have maintenance and you go back to that waterfall home, okay, home key doesn't work here apparently. Yeah. So if you go into maintenance, could be part of deployment, could be after. You find a problem, you do have to go back through this whole cycle again. Alrighty, so let's do a little bit of Slido interactions to make sure that you're all paying attention here. Start presenting to display the poll results. Why are we not showing the slide? I'm willing to bet I got signed out of Slido. Working, working, working. I guess while this is getting up and running. So. Okay, there we go. Join the quiz. Let's make sure this is working. So the question is, what type of process is waterfall? Just want to make sure this is working. I do. Tyler West. This is not doing what I thought it was. Get ready. I'm so confused. Eh. Okay, here we go. My bad, I didn't click the slide. Hopefully everybody's still going. All right, so what type of process is waterfall? All right, if we're good with that. Linear, hey, look at that, you all got it. Voting closed. All right. What type is spiral? I'm answering it too. I get to play along as well. Oh, it's ticking up on the side here. There we go. When you test this with one person, it works a lot differently. I'm sorry about that. Alrighty. Good enough. Hey, we got some waffling answers here. Spiral would be more of an iterative. This is where I could see you making an argument for evolutionary, though. So most of you get that one. Oh no, it is evolutionary. I said that wrong. My apologies. Or did I mark this one wrong? Alright. We'll come back to that one. I would have gone with iterative in my head. Alright. How about Agile? This one should hopefully be a little bit easier. Spelunky 2 dropped if you're a PlayStation owner. I think it was last night or the night before. Parallel, so this is parallel. Absolutely. Hey, look at that. Good job. With all of you who got 3s. Interesting. Cool. Alrighty, and I want to just check something because I could have sworn that... Oh yeah, my bad. This is Spiral. Yes. So, important information for you all. Again, if you joined late or you missed the beginning, no class on Friday. You can pet the dog? Oh, game of the year. Is that why Polygon rated it 10 out of 10? So I got my 6-year-old daughter playing Spelunky, and her favorite part is to rescue the dog. I would have to imagine, so 10 out of 10. Gotta pet the dog. All right. So no class Friday. I will be on Discord and email. Absolutely, right? I mean, you gotta pet the dog. You will have something to do for the class period, so consider it your forced weekly meeting minutes. I will send out an announcement for how to submit that, since you're not going to have to technically set up your repos by the end of the month. If there's a dog in your game, you have to be able to pet it, or it's a bad game. Those of you making games for your term project with dogs, take that into consideration. All right, so we've got a couple of minutes. Does anybody have any questions on the assignment that's due at the end of the month? Because I was hopefully leaving a little bit of time to show you how you could do this, if you would like. So did I already fork this? I did fork it, okay. Oh, and Daniel forked my fork. Nice. All right, so we can talk about this momentarily then. Let me get my Vaporwave up and running. Some hot beats. Call it my outro music. So I forked this already. That's going to be really annoying, sorry. So I forked it. Again, one person forks and adds those people as team members. So if I go to this repo, here I am. I want to add a collaborator. I go to Settings, Manage Access, type in my password, and invite a collaborator. So if you go to that spreadsheet that I shared with you, your GitHub names should all be in there. So section 2, here's your GitHub username. So basically this is what you would put into your invite collaborator. So if I want to add my dummy account here, just invite. This person gets an email and then they have access to collaborate. I could have sworn at one point GitHub had a little bit more fine-grained permissions, but either I'm thinking of a different, maybe an organizational type of thing or whatnot, but basically you can only be a collaborator. So here I've download it. So I did the git clone this repository before, and git status. This is not a git repository. Oh, I did not do this. All right, so, oh, named it something else. All right, so git clone, zoom, 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 zoom. So I pull this down. It's public, so it doesn't ask you for your username or password. And I go into Frederick's CIS350 term project, and here's all my stuff. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to add in my actual code here. So I could do this with Windows. I could do it, with the file finder, whatever. I'm just going to use my terminal here. So I have another folder, Frederick's SE. Yeah, I'm going to copy everything into here. So if you're not familiar with Linux commands, copy recursively everything from this folder into my current location. And hopefully that's... I didn't hit enter. I did hit enter. All right. So now when I look inside here, I have some fonts, I have some code, I have my PyCache, so I need to set up a git ignore file because I don't want to push this up to git, but we'll save that for later. Git add everything. Okay. Git commit -m initial source code commit. So everything got tracked now that's in here. Git push Fredericks. Suppose I could just use my actual GitHub name instead of my email. It accepts both. All right, so it's writing. Just waiting for it to. So it's basically sending up. I've got some fonts. I've got some compiled Python, which probably doesn't need to be a part of it. And all my Python files. 10:52. I realize I'm over now, so feel free to drop off if you need to go. Just want to wait for this to push up. So go into source. Hey, here's all the stuff I need to run my project. Why are you not going? Okay, clear. Oh, something's going on here. All right, and if I ran this, I would see my little game. Doot, 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 doot. So now the nice thing is this is tracked in GitHub. Nobody can see what I'm doing. Can people see this? Yeah, this is being shown. Okay, it's making sure. So basically all I did was I copied my files into my Git directory. I added them, and then I committed them and pushed them. That's all I'm trying to really show you here. Questions, comments, or concerns? Sorry for holding you over longer. I thought the commit and push would take a little bit less time, but it hiccuped. Alrighty. Other than that, I'll start here in a few minutes if you have follow-up questions. Thanks to those of you inviting me to your projects already. I've been hopefully answering all of them as they came in. And see you all next time. Bye-bye.